Hi, I'm Josh Fraimow. I am a writer, strategist, question asker, idea gatherer, and I do a lot of work with Draper DNA across a range of clients. That's an interesting question because the flip answer is I'm not supposed to have a style. I'm supposed to be a blank slate and a conduit for what clients need and want to say. Um, Obviously, the reality is people come to me because I write in a certain way. I don't have a branded style that says I am going to be a scientist. I'm going to be a comedian. I'm going to be a jester. Whatever it is, a lot of that comes intuitively. But a really important part of what I do is kind of reverse engineering that intuition to figure out what I do well and how I do it. And in thinking about that, there's really three rules that guide what I do that sort of I guess would add up to a style. And those sort of happen at different levels. At the base level, the rule kind of boils down to be fluid. And that's really at the sentence word level. You've got to have a flow. You can't let the content get boiled down in complication or jargon, which is very common in any industry I write in, that there's a lot of sort of internal language that people like to use, and that can be the death of a decent sentence, just because not everybody uses the same jargon and it just doesn't flow. It's not the way people talk. So rule number one is let the content flow the way it needs to flow and put all the extraneous stuff aside. At a much higher level and probably more important level is tell a story. That's really what it all boils down to. There's lots of facts and figures in everything I write, and every client has benefits and features and lots of stuff they want to talk about, which is all great. And some of it's even important when it comes to thinking about what the audience needs. But if you're not presenting it in a way that's compelling to the audience and telling them a story and giving it context for them, it's a waste of time. Just put out a bunch of bullet points. That's fine. Anybody can read that. But if you're not giving a story at a top level, and it doesn't need to be a complicated story, it doesn't need to go on and on and on. It could be a very simple one sentence, two sentence story, but you've got to give people a sense that, okay, I understand what's going on here. This is meaningful to me. And it's not just a list of facts and figures. And the third rule is sort of comes at it from a different angle, but maybe the most important, which is respect the audience. Again, it sort of ties into the storytelling in the sense that you don't just want to dump facts and figures on people and expect them to pick it up. We're asking people to give us their time. They don't have to read what I write. They can ignore it very easily. We have to give them a reason to want to engage. We have to respect their intelligence. We have to respect their time. That may determine the way we tell the story. It may determine the length of the story. It may determine the facts we put in there. But really think about the audience and what their needs are before anything gets put down on paper, so we're focused in the right direction. So it's flow, storytelling, respect the audience is pretty much what it all boils down to. Yeah, and this really ties into that idea of storytelling. What typically happens when I'm working with a client is they have a specific need, they have a new product, a new service, they're relaunching, whatever it is. There's a specific need, so they're very internally focused on that, and they're very proud of it. They spend a lot of time on it. They have a lot of facts and figures to back it up, and they have reasons to believe, and they think it's the best thing since sliced bread, and many times it really is. I mean, it can be really cool stuff, but there's a lot of information there. So really, my job, again, part of respecting the audience, as I talked about before, is putting myself in their shoes as best as possible. So when I'm working with a client, I've got to think about, okay, you're pouring information at me. This is great. I need as much input as I can get. But then I need to boil all that down. I need to be able to say, okay, which of this is really relevant to our audience at the point at which we're engaging with them? The sales process is a long journey, and the stuff that I'm writing typically is at the early part of that journey. So we don't need to overwhelm people with information. We need to engage them. So what is really the most important thing they need to know at this point in the cycle to get engaged, to want to find out more? We're not going to tell them everything all at once. You know what? So I need to think about, what does the audience really care about? What keeps them up at night? What problem do they have that our product, service, whatever can help solve? How can we make their job easier? So it's really, you can think about it as a Venn diagram. You know, we've got our client over on this side with lots of facts and figures and data and a great product or service, and it's awesome. And then we've got our audience prospect over here on this side that has a job to do and problems and kids to pick up from soccer and budgets to do and emails to respond to, and not a whole lot of free time for attention to us. So there's going to be an overlap between those two where what we offer meets their need. And that is where we need to communicate with them. And that's the process of boiling it all down and turning something that can be very complicated into something simple and compelling. We have lots of things we can say to them later in the process to expand on that story, give them more reasons to believe, give them context, make them comfortable. But really, at the initial point of contact, how does our product or service meet their need? And that's the process of turning something that could be really complex and making it compelling for the audience. I forget exactly what the order of this process is, but there's that early sort of dipping a toe in the water phase, and they just need to know the temperature's okay. We don't want to scare them away. Don't want to make it too cold or too hot and say, I'm not interested in this. And then there's the getting engaged. Okay, this is something I may want to find out more about. And that's the stuff we've just been talking about. And that's where we, in very bald terms, hook them to want them to find out more. And then you get to the steps as you're exactly right. It widens out and there's more information required. And some of that is still at sort of the emotional stage of, is this a good fit? Is this something I want to find out more? Am I comfortable with this? And some of that gets to the point where that emotional connection has been made. And in essence, a client has pretty much decided yes, but then they need the more rational, right brain facts and figures to justify that decision. And that's where we can have as much information and reasons to believe and support as we want. So it's really important to know what phase in the process we're talking to somebody at to determine how much information they need. The connection between sales and marketing is really, really important. And that's where a lot of organizations kind of fall down, where they keep those things more siloed and they send the sales teams off with leads and PowerPoints to do their thing. And they have splashy marketing and ads and digital and whatever, and there's no connection there. And if the marketing is not generating leads that can be qualified and is not supporting the sales effort and is not giving the sales team points that allow them to sell or present the product or service as best as possible, it's a wasted effort. Those two things need to be connected. So you really need to understand that journey all the way through. That's a great question. And I'm fortunate in that I'm just sort of naturally interested in words and new things around language, which is one side of this. And so my natural bent is to sort of be attracted to something that is new or different in its presentation, and that is a great source of inspiration, of being able to look at things in new and different ways. The reality is, I was just having a conversation with somebody about this yesterday, that no one can really say specifically where the ideas come from or when. It's not something you can literally bottle and say, okay, it's time to come up with an idea. Sometimes it works that way. Sometimes I'm a professional. I've been doing news for a long time. I can do it when I have to. That's the nature of my job, and that's the reason people pay me, is because when they ask me to do something, I can deliver. But I can't say if the idea came to me unconsciously while I was driving the car to drop off my grandson. I can't say if it came to me while I was eating dinner. I need to know how to recognize those ideas. So as they pop up out of my unconscious or seeing a headline in the newspaper that sparks something, I need to train myself to grab onto those and hold on to them and not let them disappear. So that's sort of a way of taking the intuitive, inspirational part of it and not actually quantifying it, but being able to recognize it. And that's a key skill in what I do, is that ability to recognize. But even more specifically, and again, I'm very fortunate in this, is I get inspiration when I work on something I haven't worked on before. I really like learning new things. And if I get a chance to work on a new roofing system, for example, or house wrap, or a new clinical trial process, or whatever it is, I want to learn more about it, and that inspires me to think about things in new and different ways, because I'm approaching something I've never dealt with before. And being engaged and having those new inputs and new stimuli is really what keeps it interesting. I would get very, very bored writing the same thing the same way every day.
Sorry for the pause here, but it's a really, really important question that's very hard to answer, because so much of it is just the sense of what's right and wrong. So, for instance, let me give you an example. I could be writing a sentence about a group of people coming together for an outdoor concert at the beach, completely randomly. I could choose to describe that as a group. I could choose to describe that as a gang. I could choose to describe that as a mob. I could choose to describe that as a team. It's a very simplistic example, but every word you choose has a slightly different meaning. Obviously those are all synonyms, but it really is important to match the tone and nuance of the words to the message we're trying to get across. Sometimes that is driven by the character, tone, personality of the client, that they speak in a certain way and have a certain tone of voice. And that's very important for me to pick up on, understand, and then be able to reflect back. That in that sense, I'm a little bit of I need to be a mimic. I need to be able to understand their tone of voice and continue it and express it in the work I'm doing. It needs to take into account the needs and wants of the audience. How do they speak? How do they talk? How are they used to hearing things? And ultimately, each of those individual words needs to add up into the sentence, into the story that takes people in the right direction. And so that is, to be very analytical about it, it is 73% completely intuitive, 20% completely scientific, and what does that leave us? 7% just fairy dust and magic. I don't know. I mean, that's one of those things that I think about in sort of having to reverse engineer. And it's easy for me to say I know it when it's right. It's much harder to explain exactly why, because it is that sort of accretion of meaning of individual words combined that can change the tone of a sentence or paragraph completely. I hope you are not expecting me to give a simple answer to this one. And I would just go back very briefly. I was an English major in college, so I read a lot of literature, a lot of different kinds, and stumbled into advertising and marketing, and found a great connection, and I love it. But I was never driven to that. What I was enamored of, and what I'd like to read, are things that have a really interesting premise, potentially a puzzle or a unique spin that could be sort of boiled down to very genre based. Is it a mystery novel? Is it a science fiction novel based on the ability to time travel? Whatever it is. But the things that I really love are the things that sort of take that premise, that puzzle, and build something around it that is the flesh and bones and adds life, and uses that as a springboard to tell a really interesting story. And I think about things like a novel that stuck with me for decades, The Golden Notebook by Doris Lessing. Just it really interesting, intriguing, a little bit of a puzzle of a premise, but the story around it is amazing. Or Colson Whitehead's novels, The Intuitionist, The Underground Railroad, that take really interesting premises. You know, the Underground Railroad. What if the Underground Railroad was actually a railroad? You know, what a cool premise. But then building a story around that just is fantastic. So I don't have a favorite author so much as sort of a style of writing, of storytelling, that takes really interesting, cool premises that could be sort of the term is like a puzzle box, like trying to figure out how to open it, but then unlocking that and building a really human story around it. Nabokov was great at that. Shakespeare, come on, how can you not like Shakespeare? But the flip side of that, and this goes back to something I said earlier, is I like to find out new things. So as much as anything these days, I'm reading stuff online, I'm reading magazine articles, I'm reading essays and blog posts and things that just expose me to things I don't know about. And that's really fun. So I think there's this idea of sort of continually learning new things that keeps me as sharp as I can be at this point, and really wanting to find out more. And that's the stuff that really keeps me engaged. Yes, one of my first jobs in the advertising world. I worked at a very small agency in Rhode Island that did a lot of work for government agencies and nonprofits, very small, very low budgets. So we had to do a photo shoot for a economic development client. And the concept involved a business person in a suit and shaking hands, sort of the standard kind of thing. And the head of the agency had a camera. I had a suit jacket. So we set that up downstairs in the office and took my picture, and I thought that was really cool. And they ran the ad, and the head of the agency came back to me and said, we're going to have to get Mike, the other guy who worked there, to take a shot of his hand, because your hand is it's too young and soft. It doesn't scream business economic development. And that was a crushing moment and the end of my modeling career.